Hi everyone. Once again, good morning. It's morning over here. We'll be going on a second podcast in our series of podcasts. And today's podcast is on the Internal Audits and Outsourcing, which is Chapter 13, Internal Audits and Outsourcing, Chapter 13 of our study text. All right. This chapter or this area is not seldomly tested by the examiner. He doesn't test it frequently. In 22 diets, I think he tested it just 5 times. 5 times. November 2022, November 2019, he tested it twice. Then May 2017, and then November 2016 in 22 diets. All right, so take note of it. Who knows whether he's going to test it again this coming November diet. All right, so let's look at the first question on Olivia Bank Limited. It's quite a long read, but then we won't go through the narrative or the scenario. We'll just speak to the questions right away, so we could be fast and glean on what exam techniques to use to answer such questions. All right, so we are required from this Olivia Bank Limited question 6 to A, discuss the main reasons for outsourcing internal audit functions, and that is 3 marks. B, outline the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing, 10 marks. And C, discuss which part of internal audit function that cannot be outsourced, 2 marks. So we have a 15-mark question from the scenario. If you read, I think the first line says the internal audit unit of Olivia Bank Limited has been accused of collusion with staff in committing monumental fraud. Okay, so go through the case, read through it. You will see that the case is a practical and relevant scenario, and the questions that followed up the case also focuses on actually the internal audit function and the decision to outsource, which is highly relevant given the monumental fraud and failure of the internal audit unit at Olivia Bank. All right, so generally you observe that the part A of the question, which is the reasons for outsourcing, 3 marks, tests the theoretical benefits of using a third party, particularly the external auditors, maybe one of the big 4 firms, to perform the internal audit function. And the reasons for this revolves around independence, competence, and specialization, and also accountability, speaking to professional indemnity insurance that most of these external auditors or big 4 firms have. Then the B part, speaking to the advantages and disadvantages, which is 10 marks. It's actually a high mark list question. It tests general business and audit knowledge regarding service reliance. Actually, the mark allocation is 2 marks per point, and it demands detailed, well-explained points, not just single words, because it's a 10-mark question. So, for example, cost savings is not enough. You must explain why it saves cost around advantages and disadvantages of the outsourcing the internal audit function. Then the part C, the non-outsourceable functions, which is 2 marks, tests a crucial governance principle and the responsibility of the internal audit functions, overall strategic direction, oversight, and internal audit charter must remain with the banks, those charged with governance. So those are my general observation on that question. So let's get to the nitty-gritties. What and how do we write for each part of the question? So for the part A, which is the reasons for outsourcing, it's 3 marks. So what do you write? In writing these questions, you could see the answers on the screen. What do you write? You need to focus on the benefits of using a professional firm. which is the reasons. And the key reasons include achieving greater independence, which is critical, especially in this case after a collusion issue had transpired. Number 2 is gaining access to specialized expertise. This expertise is needed for online banking, phishing, and malware attacks. So access to specialized expertise is one of the reasons. And number 3 is the service provider being subject to professional standards and accountability, speaking to professional indemnity. So those are the 3 cardinal reasons that you may link to the case that are the benefits for using a professional firm. So how do you write that? You could see from the screen, you could use a numbered list of at least 3 reasons, and you gain 1 mark for each. So ensure the points relate directly to the need for higher quality control and specialized skill. All right, so that's it for the A part. Let's look at the B part, which is advantages and disadvantages of about 10 marks. So what do you write for the B part? You need to focus on cost savings. That is, eliminating staff costs is an advantage. So when you want to hire an internal audit staff, you eliminate that cost if you are outsourcing to an audit firm or an external auditor. Number 2 is enhanced expertise. You have access to specialists the bank lacks. And also, it gives management the time to save and focus on core activities than recruiting for an internal audit or overseeing the internal audit function and all that. And the disadvantages, which is 2 points, you could provide to get 2 marks each for 4 marks. You need to focus on loss of control. So one of the points is focus on loss of control is a disadvantage, speaking to reliance on the service provider, the priorities and the timelines. And number 2 is the need for monitoring, in ensuring service lines are met. And number 3 point you could provide is the risk of underspecification, speaking to the external party misunderstanding the bank's unique needs. So these are some of the disadvantages you could submit. Some other thoughts are there, but then these are the cardinal ones you could submit, and you could see that's what the examiner, to some extent, provided on the screen. So how do you write that? Use 2 separate bold headings for advantages and disadvantages to delineate them. Provide concise explanations for each point to justify the 2 marks awarded. So aim for 3 advantages and 3 disadvantages, at least for safety, to get the full 10 marks. Then the C aspect, speaking to the non-outsourceable function, is 2 marks. So what do you write? State clearly the ultimate oversight, the governance and responsibility for the internal audit functions, performance and strategic direction cannot be outsourced. And this includes approving the internal audit charter, risk-based audit plans, and monitoring the external provider's performance. So how do you write that? Provide 2 distinct parts of the function, which you get 1 mark for each. Number 1 is the oversight and governance by the audit committee or the board of directors, and the responsibility for setting the scope and charter of the internal audit function. So those are the main points you could submit to glean and earn the 2 marks. So general strategies for earning the marks, which are applicable to all questions, but specifically to this question. Number 1 is, this first strategy is try to link your answers to the scenario. So in your discussion and your submission of your answers, your thoughts should briefly reference the context of the scenario. So for example, the reason for outsourcing is directly linked to the coalition with staff in committing monumental fraud, which necessitates external independence and expertise. Then number 2, try to use subheadings for lists. So for lists like advantages and disadvantages in the Part B section of the question, use clear headings and bullet points to ensure the marker easily identifies the points and assigns you the marks. So make it easy for the marker to mark you. So 2 points per point, 2 marks per point here means detailed explanations are required, especially for the Part B. Then the third strategies for core governance concepts, the Part C, you need to, when discussing non-outsourcing, use the precise term, those charged with governance, or audit committee or the board of directors, emphasizing the non-delegatable or delegable oversight responsibility. This is very, very important. Okay, so for the marking guide, let's look at the marking guide and see how to resolidify and speak to some of those points again, so that when we hear it again, it will sink in. So for the marking guide, you see that the Part A, which is reasons for outsourcing, is 3 marks. So to earn the marks, the key is the professional advantage, which is the reasons. Number one is, one of the advantages, just to recall and remind us, is number one is achieving greater independence and objectivity, which is crucial from the scenario due to the past collusion. That's the reason for outsourcing. Number two is access to highly trained specialists and better technology. And this is needed for addressing complex online banking and malware fraud. Number three is the external firm is subject to professional codes of conduct and is legally accountable, speaking to professional indemnity insurance. So these 3 reasons will help you earn the 3 marks very seamlessly. The Part B of the question around advantages and disadvantages, you could see from the screen that is 10 marks. So to earn the marks for advantages, you need to provide at least 3 required points. So number 1 is cost savings, and that is 2 marks. So cost savings, speaking around savings on staff recruitment, training, supervision, and benefits compared to the full-time in-house department. That's an advantage. Number 2 is access to expertise, which is another 2 marks. Immediate access to IT audit and fraud specialists. So, for example, for forensic accountants who might not be affordable or available in-house for the company to recruit, is another advantage they could get from the external audit firm. And number 3, increased independence, which is another 2 marks. So the external firm or the external auditors are less susceptible to management influence and internal politics that could influence the internal auditor, and this could enhance objectivity. So those 3 points, you have 6 marks, you have 1 mark as a buffer. Then for the disadvantages, to earn the remaining 5 marks, your thoughts should center around number 1, dependence and loss of control is a disadvantage, which is 2 marks. The risk of the service provider prioritizing other clients, leading to delays or loss of direct control over day-to-day operations and urgencies are one of the disadvantages. External audit firms have a lot of clients, and some of them may not have that direct priority for such a client. So those are some of the disadvantages around using external auditors or firms for the internal audit function. Number 2 is confidentiality and understanding, which is another 2 marks. The risk of loss of highly sensitive information, or the external audit firm or the provider failing to fully understand the bank's unique culture and specific risk requirements, speaking to lack of deep institutional knowledge, is another disadvantage of outsourcing the internal audit function. And finally, to end the other 2 marks, the cost, the fee negotiation, problems or potential problems with negotiating an appropriate fee or scope creep, leading to unexpected costs, could be a challenge for management. So these 3 points or some other points around this you submit would earn you the 5 marks for the disadvantages. So that's 10 marks you could glean. Your thoughts should center around those discussions and submissions. So for the Part C, the non-outsourceable functions, which is 2 marks. To earn the marks, number 1 is to speak around the oversight and accountability. You see, the ultimate responsibility for the governance, risk management, and control processes remains on. So sorry about that. For the governance and risk management processes and control function remains with the board or the audit committee and those charged with governance. So speaking to the strategic direction, the function of approving the internal audit charter and the risk-based internal audit plan cannot be delegated. So you see that this represents the bank's ownership of its entire internal control environment. So it's very important to emphasize that the oversight and accountability, the strategic direction of the internal audit function cannot be outsourced. This is very, very key and important. All right. So that's it for this question on the Olivia Bank Limited, which is question 6, November 2022. All right, so let's rush to the next question, which is November 2019, question 1C and question 1E, which is Yoga Limited. All right, you see it's a short read, but we'll not go through the context of the case. Please read through the context of the case. Let's just speak to the requirements. So based on this case of Yoga Limited, the C aspect, we are required to, sometimes in an outsourcing situation, the external supplier controls the information from which the figures in the general ledger are obtained, and the audit client might hold none of this information. So we are required to discuss the issues that the auditor ought to consider in this situation, which is 4 marks. Then the E aspect speaks to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing, 6 marks. We just saw that in a previous question. All right, so we have 10 marks question in this Yoga Limited question. It's a 10-mark question. The C part is 4 marks. The E part is 6 marks. All right, so you will see that this question focuses on the essential audit considerations when a client like Yoga Limited outsources the critical function, which is payments, to a third-party service organization, Heidi Limited. And you see that this question directly tests the application of ISA 402. ISA 402 is audit considerations related to an entity using a service organization and general business acumen. Okay, so generally you observe from each of these questions that the part C, which is the outsourcing issues, tests our understanding of key concerns when the primary source of evidence, which is payment records, is held by a third party. And the issues rightly center on access to evidence, the assessment of controls at the service organization, and the completeness and accuracy of data transfer back to the client. You also observe the part E part of this question, speaking to outsourcing A&D. This is a generic high-level business knowledge question because the advantages focus on efficiency, expertise, and cost, while the disadvantages focused on risk, control, and governance. So those are my general observations, but we'll see that as we go into the nitty-gritties on how to address such a question. So what do you write? How do you write each part of this question briefly? So for the part C, we'll see that the issues for the auditor's consideration is 4 marks. So what do you write? You need to focus on the challenge of getting sufficient appropriate audit evidence. And the key issues are: number 1, materiality. Is the outsourced function, which is payments in this scenario, material to the financial statements? Those are questions you ask as the auditor. Number 2 is access. Can the auditor or the client contractually access Heidi Limited's records? Number 3, control risk. How will the auditor access the effectiveness of controls at Heidi Limited? So, for example, through a Type 1 or Type 2 service organization control report, can the auditor access the effectiveness of Heidi Limited's controls? Important question on control risk. Number 4 is data integrity. Are the procedures of transferring information back to Yoga Limited's general ledger complete and accurate? So these are pertinent questions that needs to be answered in assessing sufficient appropriate audit evidence. And how do you write that? Use a numbered list of at least 4 points. So ensure each point is discussed briefly. So have the point and elaborate on that point, then you get the 1 mark for that. So you can see some of these answers are provided very clearly on the screen. The point listed, then the explanation briefly. Very, very important. Okay, so the part B, advantages and disadvantages, is easy. We just looked at that in the last question. But then what do you write in this? For the advantages, 3 points should suffice. You need to focus on specialized expertise, which is needed for the e-commerce online payment specific to this scenario now. Number 2 is potential cost savings and allowing management to focus on core activities like selling goods online, as it is in this case. So try to tie the advantages and disadvantages to the case scenario. Very important. And for the disadvantages, you need to focus on loss of direct control, risks to confidentiality, and security of customer data, which is crucial for a bank payment processor. And the potential for the work to be underspecified. Talking about Heidi not meeting Yoga's exact needs. So those are the disadvantages as you tie this to this scenario. So how do you write that? You need to use 2 bold headings, separate them, advantages and disadvantages, clearly delineated. So provide at least 3 distinct points for each, and you have 1 mark per point to get 3 marks disadvantages, 3 marks disadvantages to earn the full 6 marks. So let's see how to strategize. General strategies for earning the marks is generally applicable to all questions, but for this scenario we have here for Yoga Limited, number 1 is to reference ISA 402. It's not compulsory, but it's good. The question actually did not explicitly mention the standard, but the concepts discussed around control risk materiality are core to ISA 402. So if you frame your discussion using terms like service organization, user, auditors, signals, technical parts, and all that based on ISA 402, you impress the examiner and you earn your mark very seamlessly. So try to reference a standard that applies to a question if you remember under exam condition. Number 2 is breadth over depth for the part C. What do I mean? You see that the marking guide for part C awards half mark for the point. Will come to the specific guidance on marking key. So you have 1 half mark for discussion, half mark for elaboration. So for 4 marks, you need 4 distinct, well-elaborated issues. So don't just provide a list. That's what I mean by breadth over depth. Don't just provide a list. Identify and elaborate on your point. Very simple. Breadth over depth. Number 3 is balanced list for the part E side of the question, which is 6 marks. You must provide a minimum of 3 advantages and 3 disadvantages to earn 1 mark each to achieve the maximum score of 6 marks. All right, so let's move to the marking key now, and let's use it to resolidify our understanding of how to answer such questions and earn the marks. So specific guidance for each question based on this marking key. Now for the part C, the issues for auditor consideration, which is 4 marks. You need to be careful, and to earn these marks, the key is mentioning both the risk and the response. Number 1 is materiality again. Let's go over this. For materiality, determining if the outsourced operation, which is payments, is material in the context of the financial statement. So it's linked to the scenario. Your answer should be linked back to the scenario. Don't just discuss generic materiality. Link it to the scenario. So the outsourced issue in this scenario is payments. So in the context of the financial statement, is it material? That's what you should ask. Number 2 is the control risk assessment. In assessing the design and operating effectiveness of internal controls at the service organization, Heidi Limited. So it's very important to state that to earn the 2nd mark. Number 3 is access to records. In ensuring the engagement letter provides contractual access to Heidi's records, or obtaining a service organization control report, which is type 1 or type 2, from Heidi's auditor is very important. That's the 3rd point. And the 4th and final point is transfer of information. In checking the controls surrounding the completeness and accuracy of data transferred from Heidi to Yoga Limited's general ledger, which is key. On the B aspect, you see that 6 marks was allocated for advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing. So to earn the marks for advantages, you clearly start with advantages. Number 1 is the expertise and technology, the access to specialist skills. So for example, IT security, online payment processing, and up-to-date technology that Yoga Limited may lack. It's a very clear advantage based on the scenario. Number 2 is cost savings, avoiding investment in fixed assets, technology infrastructure, recruitment and training of in-house staff. So this cost savings area based on the case are an advantage of outsourcing the activity of the internal audit function. Number 3 is focus on core activities. Outsourcing the internal audit function will allow Yoga's management to concentrate time and effort on procuring and selling goods online. So that their e-commerce business, they'll focus on that very specifically. So those are the 3 points or thoughts centered around earning the 3 marks. Then to earn the marks for disadvantages, you need 3 points required. Number 1 is loss of control. The reduced direct oversight over the process and timing of the outsourced function, and also creating reliance on the provider. It's a seeming disadvantage. Number 2 is confidentiality and security risk. Increased risk of data breach or unauthorized disclosure of Yoga's and its customer sensitive financial information held by Heidi. It's a seeming disadvantage. Number 3 is service quality risk, potential for failure due to inadequate service level agreement specification, resulting in lower priority or quality service compared to an in-house function. So those are the disadvantages of outsourcing the internal audit activity. And that will be it for that question on Yoga Limited. All right, so let's run to the next question, which is the same November 2019 on auditing standards. Okay, so it's a short scenario, but then just read through it. And we are required to, A, is a full 20-mark question. So we're required to describe an internal audit function, which is 2 marks. Very simple, describe an internal audit function. B part is explain with 4 examples the work of the internal auditor that the external auditors could rely on. It's another 4 marks. Number 3 is evaluate 3 matters that the external auditors need to consider in determining whether the work of the internal auditor could be used for the purpose of the audit or not. 6 marks. And D is to describe how external auditors may evaluate the objectivity and competence of the internal auditors. And that is 8 marks. We have a total 20 marks question here. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question is actually a fundamental test of ISA 610, which is using the work of internal auditors, which defines the condition under which an external auditor can place reliance on the internal audit function. It's a core topic in Advanced Audit Assurance and Forensic subject, which is chapter 13. All right, so generally you observe from these questions that the part A, which is the internal audit function description, tests the formal definition. And we need to answer clearly. And if we'll look at the answers, you see that some of the answers breaks down into core components of the internal audit function around an appraisal system, which is established by management to review controls around financial controls, operational controls, compliance controls, like that. So we'll come to that. Then for the B part, which is the reliance on the work of the internal audit function, this area tests the practical overlap. And some examples must be distinct and useful to the internal audit function, which focuses on control testing, vouching, and documentation. So examples around work that helps reduce the external auditor's substantive testing are the areas external auditors could rely on the internal audit function. Then for the part C on the general assessment matters, this area tests the overarching considerations before deciding to rely on the work of the internal auditor. And the key points are around the status and objectivity around the internal audit functions reports, the internal audit's technical competence, its communication and scope. So these are my thoughts around, or my observations around the C part of the question. Then for the D part, the evaluation of objectivity and competence, this area tests the specific procedures used to verify the general assessment, which is directly from part C. So we need to correctly list the checks of the internal audit functions processes around supervision, documentation, and actually the external auditor specific testing of the internal audit functions work. This is very, very important. All right, so let's get to how to answer and what to answer, very importantly. So what do we write? How do we write each part of this question? For the part A, which is, we are asked to describe an internal audit function, is 2 marks. What do we write? Let's go to the answer and glean some thoughts on how to write such a question. So what do we write? In writing, a comprehensive description must state the internal audit function is an independent appraisal function established by management as a service to the entity, primarily for reviewing the accounting, internal control, and governance system of an organization. So that's what to write. And how do you write that? Provide the formal definition, ensuring you capture the management service and control review aspects, very importantly. Then for the B part, what do you write? The B part asks us for examples of work for Reliance. That's for the external auditor relying on the internal audit work. So what do we write? You need to list 4 distinct examples of work that aids the external audit, primarily focusing on transactions and controls. So the first one, your thoughts should center around review and documentation of key internal controls, which is useful for the external auditor's understanding phase of the business. Number 2 is testing of operational controls. For example, inventory count, physical asset verification, and the likes. Number 3 is substantive testing and confirmation. For example, secularization of specific payables and receivables, very important. Number 4 is provision of schedules and or analysis. So, for example, detailed expense breakdowns, details of variances are some of your thoughts and your submissions to center around these points. So, how do you write that? Use a numbered list of 4 examples, and you have 1 mark for each. So, you have 4 marks for that question, that part B, part of the question. Then for the C aspect, we ask for matters for Reliance considerations, which is 6 marks. So what do you write? The 3 matters are the core elements of ISA 610. ISA 610's general assessment. So number 1 is objectivity. The external auditor wants to assess the internal audit function's organizational status and its particular reporting line. Preferably, the internal auditor is supposed to report to the audit committee and board rather than the finance director. Very important. So the external auditor will assess this. Number 2 is technical competence and due care. The assessment of staff qualifications, training, and the use of systematic documented approach to their work is going to be assessed by the external auditor, their technical competence and due care. Number 3 is scope and communication, assessing any restrictions on the internal audit functions work and ensuring effective, timely communication between the 2 teams, the 2 audit teams, which is the external and the internal audit firm. So how do you write that? You use a numbered list of 3 points, and the 2 marks per point require you to state the factor, which is objectivity, and explain how it's accessed. So, for example, checking reporting lines, very, very important. All right, let's speak to the D aspect of the question right now. The D aspect of the question. The aspect is testing or asking us for the evaluation of objectivity and competence, which is 8 marks. So what do we write? In writing, the evaluation procedures fall into 2 categories. Number 1 is objectivity and competence assessment of the internal audit function. So procedures like reviewing the internal audit functions charter, reviewing the staff's qualification, their mandatory program of continuous education, and reviewing the internal audit functions reporting line. is how you assess their objectivity and competence. Number 2 is testing the internal audit functions work. Specific evaluations around procedures to verify the quality of their execution, such as reperforming some of their tests, examining their working papers, reviewing their examining their working papers around review, supervision, and documentation, and checking if their conclusions are consistent with their findings. Very important. So how do you write that? Use clear, specific, separate bullet points. Since the allocation is 8 marks and you have 2 marks per point, so aim for at least 4 detailed procedures covering both the initial structural checks and the final work quality checks. This is very important. So for this case, you need to very practically let's see how to generally strategize to earn marks on this particular question. So number 1 strategy is try to reference ISA 610, if you remember. Though it's not explicitly required, but you see, if you reference this standard, it frames the entire response and impresses the examiner. And you also provide correct technical context to your answers. So if you remember, please try to reference the standard. It's very good. Number 2, try to define and differentiate, especially for part A. Ensure your definition is complete by capturing the internal audit function as an appraisal function established by management and is for management. So try to define and differentiate. Number 3 is for the core reliance factors, which is question part C and part D. When discussing reliance, always use the key ISA 610 factors around objectivity, technical competence, and due professional care, speaking to systematic approach. So use these terminologies very consistently and you get the marks easily. Number 4 strategy is implementable procedures. So it's specific to part D. You see that the evaluation in part D requires stating specific actions the external auditor takes. So for example, examining reporting lines, reviewing qualifications of the internal audit function, and reperforming the work of the internal auditor to see if their findings, their testings, their substantive testing are consistent with their findings. This is very important. Okay, so let's run through the specific guidance for each question based on the marking key. So for the part A question, from the screen, you'll see the marking guide. So let's look at how to glean the marks and solidify our understanding of some of these concepts. So for the part A, we're asked to describe an internal audit function, 2 marks. So to earn the marks, you must include 2 key aspects. Number 1, it is an appraisal system or an independent function. Very important. Number 2, key aspect is it is established by management to review the entity's accounting and internal controls. Very key. Then part B, examples of work for Reliance, which is 4 marks. So for the part B, part of the question, any distinct 4 audit tasks will suffice. Number 1, review and documentation of internal controls. Number 2, testing of controls in areas relevant to the financial statements. For example, purchase cycle. Number 3, physical verification of assets, which includes inventory, fiscal assets, and the likes. Number 4, carrying out specific substantive procedures around debtor-creditor confirmation or analysis. So your thoughts should center around this to earn the 4 marks. Then for the C aspect, speaking to matters for Reliance consideration, to earn the marks, you need to explain the assessment fully, which is 2 marks. The first issue to speak around is objectivity. This is assessed by the reporting relationship, asking questions around who the internal audit function reports to. Ideally, it's to the audit committee or to the board directly, and any restrictions placed on the scope of their work should be assessed very importantly. Number 2 is technical competence, which is assessed by the internal audit functions, technical training, professional qualifications, certifications like being an associate chartered accountant, a certified internal auditor, a certified information system auditor, and ACCA, and those areas of qualifications, and also their practical experience on the job. Very importantly. Number 3 is due professional care and systematic approach. And this is assessed by reviewing the internal audit functions, audit manual, their audit charter, their risk-based audit manual, their working paper standards, their quality control policies, their procedures for supervision and review, and the likes. So that's how you earn the 6 marks. 2 marks for each of those points you provide very practically. Then for the D aspect, which is a whopping 8 marks, you need to provide thoughts around the D aspect is asking us to evaluate the objectivity and competence. So to earn the marks, you need to focus on the detailed how on the internal audit function, the detailed how. So 2 marks for each 4 points you provide. Number 1 is around reviewing the working papers of the internal audit function. So examining the internal audit function's documentation to ensure the work are properly planned, supervised, and reviewed, and that the sufficient appropriate audit evidence needed to conclude their findings was obtained before their reports. Number 2 is reperformance. The external auditor reperforms a sample of the internal auditor's work on items already examined by the internal audit function. So, for example, the external auditor retests controls or recalculates figures to confirm the internal audit function's competency and accuracy. Number 3 is examining item selection, around assessing whether in the internal auditor's sample sizes and selection methods were appropriate and representative, especially for judgmental or judgmentally selected items. And number 4 is consistency of conclusions. The external auditor needs to ensure the conclusions reached by the internal auditor are consistent with the evidence obtained and the subsequent reports prepared. This is very important. So those are the thoughts on how to earn the marks for that very powerful question. All right, so that is the end of question 3, auditing standards, which is November 2019. Okay, so let's look at this question on specific processors PLC, May 2017. It's a question 3, and it also tests the internal audit functions and outsourcing topic in chapter 13. All right, so let's look at this last question. Then I'll leave you to also crack the November 2016, which is the final question on this document that the examiner has tested. I'll just speak to this specific processors PLC question, and I'll stop here. All right, so I won't read through the scenario. We'll just go through the requirements and try to speak to them. We're required to develop a suitable presentation for your talk. So paying particular attention to the differences and similarities of the following features of the external and internal auditors. Number 1, the general role. Number 2, independence. Number 3, the work carried out in the following areas: around systems of internal control, operational auditing. Number 4, reporting responsibilities. And we have 10 marks for that A part of the question. Number B is explain what evidence you would seek as external auditor to satisfy yourself that you can rely on the work of internal auditors. 4 marks. And the C aspect is give 3 examples of internal audit activity reports that might be used by the external auditor. 6 marks. So we have a 20-mark question here. A lot of requirements to speak to. All right. So generally, you observe that from these questions, the part A, if you observe the part A, is a presentation question, which is 10 marks. This is a structured knowledge test requiring a direct comparison. And we are supposed to provide our answers and balance the view, covering 5 specific comparison points around the role, the independence, the control, the operational audit, reporting for both differences and similarities. You see that this question, the A part is the examiner awards 10 marks. So we have to provide breadth over depth, because it's a 10-mark question. We have to provide breadth over depth for this mark. So identify, when I say breadth over depth, I mean identify, then you elaborate or explain that point to end. You can't just identify or list. You have to identify and elaborate to end that full 10 marks. Then for the B aspect, you observe that The question tests the general assessment phase of ISA 610, relying on the work of internal auditors. So the point focuses on the organizational standing around the reporting line, access to management, and professional quality around competence and training documentation of the internal audit function. Also, the part C, around examples of used reports, which is 6 marks. This is a technical list question. We are to provide distinct examples of the internal audit functions work that can reduce external audit effort or duplication of effort, primarily in the areas of control documentation, compliance testing, and substantive confirmation and verification. So, for example, inventory counts is an example. So I think 2 marks will be awarded per point for a solid explanation of the report's utility. All right, so let's get down to the nitty-gritties and start speaking to the answers. So you can see the answer on the screen. The part A, we are asked to develop a suitable presentation, which is 10 marks. So what do we write? Provide 5 key points of difference. And the 5 key points you see the examiner has submitted are summarized around similarities across the 4 requested features. Number 1, the role. Number 2, the independence. Number 3, the work. Number 4, the reporting of the internal auditor. So how do you write that? So for differences, you need to focus on statutory versus management service role of the internal auditor. Number 2, the external versus organizational independence. Number 3, the financial focused versus operational focused work of the internal audit work or function. And also number 4, the shareholder versus the board reporting function of the internal auditor. So those are the areas you should speak for the differences. Then for similarities, you need to focus on the common goal of acting as a check and also using similar audit techniques around testing and inquiry. So try to ensure a brief but clear explanation of each point to secure the allocated 2 marks per point. This is very important. The B part of the question, so you need to go through the table. You can present your answers in a table list. The B part of the question, evidence sought for Reliance, which is 4 marks. So what do you write? You need to list 4 types of evidence that determine if the internal audit function is structurally and professionally reliable. So focus on the core ISA 610 factors. How do you write that? Use a bullet list of 4 items. You can see the examiner did that. You earn 1 mark for each. So try to prioritize evidence of objectivity, access to higher management, reporting line, and competence around qualifications and training of the auditor to earn those marks. Read through the answers and practice with it. Very simple and direct. Finally, for the C part, examples of the internal audit activity reports, which is 6 marks. So what do you write? You need to list 3 distinct types of reports or documentation created by the internal audit function that an external audit function will use to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence or understands the entity's controls. How do you write that? Use a bullet list of 3 examples and you earn 2 marks for each. Ensure the description is sufficient to justify those 2 marks. This is very important. So, for example, do not just write inventory count, but report on the observation and testing of the inventory count procedure. It's how to write that. Very key. All right, so let's look at general observations and strategies on how to earn the marks of this kind of question. Number 1 is try to reference ISA 610. Like I said in the last question, it was not implicitly stated. It was implicitly stated. I mean, it was not explicitly stated in this question. But then the standard is what guides this question or the area of internal audit functions and the reliance by external auditor. So although the standard is not explicitly required, but the concepts discussed around reliance, objectivity, competence are the cornerstone of ISA 610. So try to use ISA 610 terms and demonstrate technical depth in answering such a question. Number 2 is structural or structured presentation. Use bold, clear subheadings for the different features around general role, independence, etc. Especially for the part A, to ensure the examiner can follow through your thoughts and the required structure to give you the marks seamlessly. So make it easy for the examiner to mark you. Make it easy. And the next point is around core reliance factors, which is for part B and part C. You need to focus on the 3 core factors of reliance, which is objectivity, technical competence, and systematic approach, due care. So these are the critical elements of the ISA 610's assessment. Finally, explain the why. So to earn these high points, like the 2 marks per point in part C, don't just state the factor. Explain why it's important to the external audits. So, for example, how an inventory count report reduces the external auditor's detailed work. This is very important. All right, so those are general strategies. And then in the marks, let's look at the marking guide. The marking guide and how to solidify our understanding of some of these concepts. So for the part A, we have 10 marks, a whopping 10 marks, which is the presentation aspect of the question. To earn 2 marks per point, you need to speak to number 1, the general rule, which the external auditor expresses opinion on the financial statements and the internal auditor makes recommendations for improvement. So that's the general rule. The external auditors express opinion on the financial statement, internal auditor makes recommendation for improvement as they do their audit work. Number 2 is independence. External auditor is independent from the entity management. Internal auditor is independent of the departments or the staff they review. Very key. Number 3 is systems of internal control. The external auditors confirm adequacy of financial statements assurance, while internal auditors monitor compliance. You don't be ready. While internal auditors monitor compliance and recommend changes. Then number 4 is operational auditing. The external auditors do more of minimal operational review, while the internal auditors perform detailed operational reviews, sometimes 100% checks. The number 5 is reporting responsibility. The external auditor reports to shareholders, while internal auditors report to the board or the audit committee. So those are generally where your thoughts should center on presentation. So go through the answers, you see the table the examiner presented to be able to align your thoughts properly. Then for the B or for the, okay, let's look at the similarities in that same A part of the question. Similarities, we just spoke to the differences. Let's speak to the similarities. To earn the marks for similarities, you also have 2 marks per point. Number 1 is the similarities on general rule. Both external and internal auditors act as check on the activities of management and staff. Number 2 is independence. Both the external and internal auditors, don't forget, they are also on the 3 lines. They are the third line of defense based on the IIA's 3 lines model. The external auditors are independent, and on the third line of defense, both are independent of the specific work of management and the staff they review. Those are similarities. The third similarity is systems of internal control. Both of them are interested in the adequacy and compliance of the system. Number 4 is operational auditing techniques. Both use similar audit techniques around tests, inquiry, recalculation to gather their evidence. Number 5 is reporting responsibility. Both issue formal reports on the work they perform, very importantly. And for the B aspect, the evidence sought for Reliance. The evidence sought for Reliance, the B aspect. To earn the marks, you have 1 mark each for 4 points. Number 1 is access to management. Reviewing the reporting line, the internal audit must report to the audit committee or those charged with governance to access objectivity. Number 2 is professional competence around reviewing the qualifications, experience, and certifications of the internal audit function and their staff. Number 3 is quality of training, assessing the internal audit functions, adherence to continuous program of education or mandatory continuous program of education, whatever acronym it is used by the professional organization they depend on or they belong to. So the quality of training, the CPD or MCP requirements, and specialized training given the company operations are very important in assessing the evidence sought for Reliance. And finally, adequacy of documentation, reviewing the internal audit functions working papers to ensure they are well documented, reviewed, and supervised. So the systematic approach around documentation of their papers are very important. Then for the C aspect, To earn the 2 marks, which is 6, we have 6 marks for the C aspect, which are examples of internal audit activity reports. To earn the marks, you have 2 marks each for 3 points. Number 1 is report on external confirmation of balances. The internal audit function reports and working papers detailing the process and the results of their confirmation of a sample of receivables or payables, providing direct evidence of existence and valuation. Is very important. Number 2 is inventory count report. Internal audit reports documenting their observation, testing, and findings during the physical inventory count or work in progress valuation will help reduce the external auditor's time on site. Very important. Number 3 is documentation of controls. Internal audit functions reports the documentations around flowcharts and narratives on the accounting and internal control system of an entity. Assist the external auditor in fulfilling their requirement to understand the entity's internal control system. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this question, and we'll stop here. So try to crack this last question on November 2016, question 3, mixed-based question.